Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for another Watercolour Wednesday. When we were mixing up this colour palette last week, minimal colour palette, and creating all these amazing mixes from the original 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colours, they're lying here, I was musing about maybe using them to, there we are, with the hawthorn berries. I thought that some of these bright colours using the Quinacridone coral are right at the start of a hawthorn berry's life, and then yes, as they get a little bit wrinkly, a little bit more mature, some of these plums and damsons start creeping in, and of course got plenty going on green wise for the leafiness. And yes, this is EAB 27, one of my earliest PaperArtsy botanicals, actually, with the Culpeper prescription for what you can do with your leaves, your berries, your twigs, creating tincts and concoctions and all kinds of things. So I think I'm just gonna crack on. We did acorn to start ourselves off, and then we've been doing a bit of colour mixing the last couple of weeks. Take a look at the Watercolour Wednesday playlist, or also I will link in the video to this palette being mixed up so that you can go straight there and take a look. I noticed that on the acorn I did use some of the text because I love that vintage look, the Latin name for the oak and acorn, and just some of those little figure 4, figure 5, figure 6. Those in this set are originally part of that same stamp. Crataegus monogyna is the hawthorn, but in order to be able to stamp this as and when I want, or in all directions I want, without having the words being in the way, I trimmed them off myself, but obviously I have still got them here ready to go, so I can add those as stamping later on. Because I'm looking for a sort of maybe, I don't know, vintage botanical painting or vintage illustration look, I am, for once in a while, stamping in black. Not something I often do. And just as we did with the acorns, I'm using this bamboo watercolour paper, which is something I'm quite enjoying as a paper. It's got a very mild texture to it, which gives you a little bit of sort of tooth and niceness, but not so much that we can't get a decent stamping, as long as we make nice firm contact. I'm just making sure I've got contact all the way along. Now see, but we can add that bit of detail back in with a pen. I didn't concentrate very hard when I was inking up the middle. I'm going to blame my inking technique, absolutely not the stamp, because the stamps are amazing quality. To wake up these paints that we put into the palette last week, I'm just going to give them a spritz of water. That'll bring them back to life, just as they would if they were in half pans. And I think I might start at the leafy end of things, just getting a little bit of leaf colour in, because green is an easier place for me to start than coral. Coral is a newish colour for me to be playing with. But when it comes to berries, I have been to some very bright places in the past, so it's not as scary as I'm making out. But nonetheless, green is a place where if I start there, I know I can get some joy into the world. So the two greens on the palette, if you take a look at all the details from last week, or if you remember last week's video, it's green gold and serpentine green that I've got going on as direct paints. Daniel Smith, out of the tubes. But what I also did was I mixed in a little bit of this Caliente grey to get myself a darker autumn green up there. So I'll do a little bit at a distance so that you can see the process of just mixing and bringing paint down. I'm working with quite watery mixes at the moment, quite fluid, so they're moving around. And then as I start to add more detail in later layers, then I can work with a mix that is less watery and add detail later on. Trying to keep some lights where the sun is hitting those leaves. Just that sense of variation in the colour. But working with a limited palette, things are always going to look harmonious. There's this little sort of squidged leaf here, folded over so that you can only see part of it. And then what I might also do is just draw a little bit of green into these sort of buddy shapes, little buds and corners. I'm going to come back and add detail to these leaves later. Grand, that's a good start. Let's zoom in so that you can see the berries happening in a bit more close up. On those leaves I was working with my silver black velvet brush, size 2, round, but I'm also a fan when I'm working with watercolours, particularly in a fine detail stamp, of working with these Pentel water brushes, because they also come to a very fine tip and they stay quite sturdy. They're not sort of perfect watercolour brushes, the expensive sort, but they'll do a great job of just giving you a really fine, easy brush to work with. So don't be feeling you have to kind of get all the expensive gear right away. If watercolour is something new for you, there are absolutely products you can start experimenting with at a reasonable price range. In my experience, I do have to tell you that once you start investing in better quality materials, the difference in your results does change. Particularly good paper makes a huge difference. Obviously good paints can make a difference, highly pigmented paints will make a difference to how your work happens, and good brushes will change your approach. But there's no need to start there, because watercolour might not be something you feel the urge to pursue. So why spend a load of money? So this mix, this yellowy mix, just trying to remember, it was Quinacridone coral and the green gold, I think, got me a kind of yellowiness. So I'm just, because we're working a minimal palette, I don't want to bring in a separate green. I want to work with all colours that I've mixed from this limited palette, which is going to mean the overall effect in the end is very harmonious, because everything is coming from the same original colours. But it might be a little less, let's say, naturalistic than if I were working off the full palette of colours. And then what I might do is use just a little bit of this Potter's Pink and Perylene Violet to just come into where the hawthorn berry stems really enter the hawthorn berry. They quite often have quite a bit of colour to them. So I'm just adding a little bit of that pink in some of the stems where it's a bit closer to the berry. And then just adding it for detail in other places, because it creates a nice contrast. We'll come back and have a look at some of that later. And you do very often get those sort of stems and branches that have a pinky tone to them. So I think that's quite a nice way to vary the colour of our stems and branches. Grand. Let's wipe off that brush tip. And it's time to be bold. I'm going to start with a bit of pure coral, which is going to be too much, but I'm just going to put that sort of round the lighter side of the berry. And I'm also going to try and just preserve, if I'm imagining light is coming from up here, I'm going to try and preserve a little bit of unpainted surface area just where that light would hit those berries. So that's just going to help us with a sense of light and life. It's going to help us with a sense of dimension. He's going to have less of one because he's tucked behind some other berries, so there might be no light hitting him at all. We'll see. So this is very, very pink at the moment, but fear not. We're going to go back in and get ourselves a little bit of a darker hit by mixing that with some Perylene Violet. So that's now Quin Coral. Yeah, see, this was sort of why I didn't want to zoom in too far. I'm still playing with this in terms of how much you get to see of the painting in a close zoom and how much you get to see of process. So now I'm going to take those darker colours round the edges. So I'm building again a sense of dimension, just catching the roundness of those berries. And you can probably see that I'm using a stroke that really follows the shape of the berry as well, trying to get that sense of rotundity. He's quite dark again, as I say, because he's tucked behind other berries. Likewise this one. But the others, I'm trying to leave that sense of a bit of soft fluidity. Let's go straight Perylene Violet into that. And if I start adding some darks, I'm going to take some of that Caliente grey, mix that into the colour we've got going up here. That's a real sort of dark damson plum kind of colour. And opposite where my dot of light is, I'm going to add some more depth of shadow down at the bottoms of the berries. And that gives them a kind of weight, gives them a bit more 3D presence. Let's just wipe that clean. Let's come back in with a bit of the berry mix here. And then if I come back in while things are still mostly wet, what I can do is just draw that colour around and let it mix and blend on the paper. I'm in my head at the moment, I'm debating letting that dry and then doing a glaze of green gold versus adding some green gold right now. So I can do an experiment on one of these berries. I want a little bit more orangey shine to them. So by mixing in that bit of green gold, as we know, gets us closer to this mustardy colour here. I'm not going to do it on all the berries. And I'm going to let some of those mix right now here while they're wet. And then I am going to let things dry and then come back in and do some more detail. In the meantime, those leaves have been drying. So what I can do is get a bit more of this serpentine green. I'm going to dry off my brush a little bit. In fact, it might be a good idea to use, rather than the water brush for this, let's get ourselves a slightly stronger mix of the serpentine green. And I'm going to come into some of these leaves and just add a bit more detail and depth. So I'm coming in down the stem, just allowing that colour to arrive, and then I can come back and move it around. This is one of the things I've been really enjoying about the bamboo paper, is it does seem to have quite a lot of playtime to it, that you get to move your colours around, which is really the ideal in a watercolour paper. If you've got paper that is very absorbent, and this is true, I've said this when we're working on inky techniques as well. The kind of absorbency of the paper you're using is going to have a massive effect on how your inks work and how your watercolour paints work, because a really absorbent paper is going to suck that pigment into it, hold on to it, and you won't have any of this sort of playtime that I've got at the moment to move that colour around. So one of the reasons watercolour paper is important for watercolours, or one of the reasons that I like working with a fairly or slightly slick surface when I'm playing with inks, distress inks or whatever inks it might be, is that you get that playtime for the inks to be mobile. And if you're working with a water reactive medium like distress inks or watercolour, that's really the whole fun of it. You can see I'm using a bit of Caliente grey now to just add shading in some places on these branches and the little knobbly bits on the branches. I do love a nice knobbly branch. Bits where it goes behind and in front and round and under. So just looking out for places where there might naturally be a bit more shadow, because the contrast of lights and darks is one of the main things that can really make a painting pop. So again, I've got all this lovely detailing on these berries, the little mouth of the berry. So I'm just using again the Caliente grey in quite a strong mix to add a bit more presence to those. And so that little bit in the middle where the stamping wasn't perfect, it's kind of fine now, isn't it? While the paint is still wet, you can always lift off with kitchen towel, or you can lift off even after the paint has dried. You can lift off with a clean wet brush. It's another of the joys of watercolour painting. So let's do a little bit of lifting just to show that happening. So I'm going to move to the slightly larger brush. This is a clean brush. Don't want it too wet, but I'm going to come in and I'm going to pick up some of this green. So this is another way to create the illusion of light hitting something. If I moisten this paint again on a good paper, you should be able to pick up some of that paint and just create a bit more light and shade. Let's put a little bit through here. One thing nature almost never has is an area of flat colour. That's a very man-made look. The minute colour is only one shade or only one tone, our brains immediately interpret that as man-made. Plastic is all one colour. A plastic pot never has the variations that a beautiful ceramic pot has. A plastic berry that you buy to put in a wreath so that it'll last a nice long time never has all the variation and detail of an individual berry. So I hope you can see how those little white dots create that illusion of light, and where, because of you know, we're working in extreme close-up here, quite a lot, where I've lost some of that paint, I can of course come back with a little bit of either gouache paint, which is a watercolour medium, similar to a watercolour medium, but has just a little bit more opacity to it, or I'm going to use some ink, or you could even use acrylic paint for this, or you can use a white gel pen, whatever white medium you choose, because at this point it's really fine. And I'm just going to reinsert on some of these ones where it's vanished. I'm going to put back in, I need a bit more. So this is the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. We used this in some video recently. I'm mixing a little bit of water in that so that I get the fluidity I need to use it with my dip pen, and just letting it soak up into the nib there. So this one I think wants a little dot of white back. This one definitely has light hitting it. This one definitely has light hitting it. So it's partly where I mixed in some of that green gold earlier. So just reinstating those little dots of light to create the illusion of both dimensionality and light and shade. Nice glossy berries we've got now with that little hit of white. The whiter the white, the glossier the berry. And you can also use it to just add a little bit of detailing around the edge of a leaf here and there. It can be quite nice again, just to catch the light with it. Just gives the eye something to hold on to. I think that's pretty nice. Trying to remember if I did a little bit of, I think I did a little bit of just a wash of something around the edge. Might do a little bit of inking rather than that, but what I do want to do is my text stamping. So let's get that next. What do I want? Put the hawthorn berries away and get out Cretaceous Monogina and figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. I think we might stamp the figure 1, figure 2, figure 3 somewhere there, and I'm going to put the name of it there. Don't have to stamp these both in one. If I want them straight, it's probably an idea to do them separately. So let's try and get that going along the grid line of the stamping block. A little bit of black ink. Trust the straight line. Good. And figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. Again, I'm going to try and make sure they're lined up on one of the vertical lines for this one. Where are we? Vertical lines, so that can line up my wording. And I think that nestles rather nicely in there. Trust the grid line. Very good. So a little bit of maybe pumice stone, I think, to go around the edge, just to give ourselves a little bit of vintage paper effect. Oh, and I like that a lot. I think what there is a bit of frayed burlap oxide on that sponge, actually. So that's giving me quite a lot of depth around the outside. You can see there's a difference. So what I'm going to do, I need to make sure I keep the whole series nearby when I'm doing this, so that if I do that to one of them and decide it's the thing I want to have happen, I've got all the others ready and available to do the same to. And then I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that pumice stone off the mat with some water and do a little bit of delicate spatter. Just again to create that sense of maybe a blotchy, inky page in an old medicinal herbal volume. That's nice. So when you get these early botanicals, you do of course get lots of other ephemera that you can also use to build cards and layers and detailed projects. But for this series, I just wanted to really focus on these botanicals and use them in these Watercolour Wednesday episodes to really explore some of the possibilities of colour mixing, colour blending, glazing, adding extra detail, so on and so forth. So I hope you've enjoyed that little bit of Watercolour Wednesday playtime. Thank you, as always, for your company on this creative journey. It simply wouldn't be the same without you, so do leave comments and questions down below. In the description, I will put details of what we've been using here today. Thank you, and happy crafting all.